Hello and welcome to our CalTPA Cycle 1 Step 2 training session. Today we will be discussing the second step of CalTPA Cycle 1, which is the Teach and Assess step. Just as a reminder and as an overview, I have provided this document which can be found in the Assessment Guidebook tab in the TPA Center on our course website. As I mentioned, today we will be focusing on Step 2, Teach and Assess. So at this point, you have already created your mathematics lesson plan and the supporting documents that go with your mathematics lesson plan, and you should have already completed your Getting to Know Your Students template and your lesson plan rationale template. During Step 2, we will talk about implementation of this mathematics lesson plan. Here's what you'll do during Step 2 of Cycle 1 of CalTPA. You will teach the planned mathematics lesson plan that you created for Step 1 to the students in your class, and you will video record this lesson. You need to record the entire lesson from start to finish so that you are able to pull out the information that you need from the lesson. I promise you, if you try just to record the sections that are needed for Step 2, something will inevitably go wrong and you will have to start from scratch. So it's best just to record the entire lesson that you teach. After you've recorded the lesson, you're going to select 3 specific clips from that lesson that have to fit under certain titles, and we will discuss that in just a bit. And on top of that, you will need to annotate the videos with specific titles and specific rationales to go along with what is evidenced inside of the video clip. And we'll go into detail regarding what the clips are and what the annotations are for each of the clips. And here we go, right into clip 1. As I mentioned, it's 3 clips. So the very first clip that you're going to do is going to be labeled Positive Classroom Environment and Setting Expectations for Learning. This means once you remove this clip from the big video file that you have, you need to title it these words in bold: Positive Classroom Environment and Setting Expectations for Learning. The video clip needs to be 5 minutes or less. It does not need to be exactly 5 minutes. It is okay if it is less than 5 minutes. It only needs to be long enough for the scorer to be able to see the evidence of your positive classroom environment and you setting the expectations for learning. Okay, so this is the beginning of your lesson. So within this video clip, what they're asking is that there's evidence that you are establishing a positive classroom environment and that you're establishing learning expectations for the content of the lesson. What are the expectations? What do you want students to learn during this lesson? And you can see here, there's some examples of how you can provide evidence of establishing that positive classroom environment and establishing the learning expectations. You can make the expectations clear. Maybe you want them on the board. Maybe you want them projected. Maybe you want the students to read them. You're going to frame the lesson. Maybe you're going to say what is going to happen ahead of time so students know what to expect. And you're going to create that safe and welcoming environment, right, where students feel appreciated and where they feel safe and nurtured in your classroom, right? And that takes on many forms, and you've already been doing that since the start of the time in your classroom, so you know what you need to do for that. And it could include you greeting the students. And you know, if you're smiling, if you're calling the students by their names, if you're thanking them for their responses, if you're saying, that was amazing, thank you for sharing that, okay? That shows that you're creating that warm, welcoming environment with your students. And maybe you're going to establish the essential questions that are going to be discussed during the lesson. How are you engaging the students? How are you establishing that positive rapport with students? Those are the pieces that can play into this clip of positive classroom environment and setting expectations. But again, it just needs to be 5 minutes or less. Clip number 2 that you will be pulling from your main video file needs to be titled Engaging Students in Activities and instructional strategies. Typically, this is going to come from the middle portion of your lesson. Again, it needs to be 5 minutes or less. Could definitely be under 5 minutes. It only needs to show the evidence that the scores are looking for. So if it's only 2 minutes or only 3 minutes, that is okay. Now here's what you need to do. You need to show that students are actively engaged in activities, strategies, and assessment that reflect the content-specific higher order thinking. That's a lot right there, right? So they're actively engaged. They're not just sitting there and staring at you and listening to you talk, but they are actively involved. They're having conversations. They are doing the talking. They are doing the working, right? Through the activities, the strategies, and the assessment. And here's a whole list of things that you can do that can show students being actively engaged in the activities. I'm not going to read through every single one of them because I know you can do that. But these are some great ideas of things that you can be doing or things that you can incorporate and then mention when you provide your rationale later, and we'll get to that. But these need to be evidenced within the clip in order for you to be able to talk about them happening within your lesson. And clip number three should be labeled next steps for learning. Typically, this comes towards the end of your lesson. Okay, and you'll pull that clip from that section. Again, 5 minutes or less. As long as it fits under that 5 minutes, it could be 1 minute, it could be 2 minutes. You just need to show how you are demonstrating the next steps for learning with your students. And here's what it's specifically asking for to be evidenced within the clip, that you summarized and checked for understanding of the content-specific learning objective. So that means you're wrapping up that lesson and you're saying, let's talk about what we learned about. What did we learn about today? What was the purpose of what we were doing with this mathematics lesson? And then you're checking for understanding to see who gets it, who doesn't get it. And then you're setting expectations for students' learning by clarifying the next steps for learning and the content and answering questions. So this is the time when you're saying, okay, here's what we learned. Okay, based on what you're telling me in this check for understanding, here's what we learned. Here's where we need to go next. Do we have questions about this? Do we understand what's going on, right? And asking those open-ended questions and getting students prepared for where you're going next in the next lesson, whether it's going to be a reteach or an extension or the next lesson that comes in the learning segment for your math curriculum. Now, here are the annotation titles that need to be included with your 3 video clips, and I'll tell you where you can place these. Okay, now here's the thing. You are not using the CalStateTEACH annotation tool in order to make these annotations. You will be using Pearson's annotation system. So once you have your 3 video clips created and you've shared them with faculty, we'll talk about that at the end. Once you have your 3 clips established, you will upload them to the Pearson website, the CalTPA website, and you will use their embedded annotation tool in order to put the annotations within your video clips. And these are the 4 annotations that you need to include. You only need to see them each once, but maybe they're going to be in multiple places in the video, and we'll talk about that. So you can see the first annotation needs to be titled this. So when you make the annotation, you're going to put the header with this title that's titled Engaging Students in Content-Specific Higher Order Thinking. That's your first title, okay? And you are going to, in that one, you're going to explain why you implemented the learning activities and use the instructional strategies that you chose to use. Okay, so that's where you get to put your rationale, and you need to put it at the minute marker where it's evidence that this is happening in your video. Okay, so it could be in that first video clip. It may end up being in that second video clip. It just depends where you feel it's best evidence. You could put this annotation in both clip 1 and clip 2 if you see it in more than one place. Wherever you see it, put this annotation there. The next the next annotation needs to be titled Creating a Positive Learning Environment. That most likely will be in clip 1, but again, it could be evidenced in all 3 videos depending on what you're providing evidence of within those video clips, you interacting with the students, okay? And in this, you're going to label your annotation, creating a positive learning environment, and you are going to explain why you chose the strategies you used to establish a positive and safe learning environment. So this means you have to have strategies for creating a positive and safe learning environment embedded into your lesson in order for you to be able to talk about it here, okay? So again, this could be an annotation that is in more than one clip, and that's okay. You need to at least have one somewhere within the 3 clips, one of each of these, but they can be in multiple places. The next one is titled Expectations for Learning. Let me move this over there. So you will title your annotation Expectations for Learning, and then you are going to explain or provide the rationale as to how you established and maintained expectations for learning throughout the lesson. Okay, and more than likely this is going to be towards the beginning of your lesson, but it could be in the middle as well. It depends how you chunk your video clips and what pieces you choose to use for your 3 5-minute video clips. The last annotation you need to create is titled Monitoring for Student Understanding. Okay, so this could be one that falls into the middle of the lesson. It could be one that falls into the end of the lesson. It actually, if you're monitoring, if you do a mini informal assessment at the beginning of the lesson, it could be there as well. So it could be, again, in multiple places. As long as you have at least one annotation titled Monitoring for Student Understanding, you will be fine. But if you put it in multiple videos or in multiple places within a video because it happens more than once, that is wonderful as well. And within this annotation, you'll put the title, and then you will explain, provide the rationale, the assessment practices you used, and how you checked for understanding of the content-specific objectives throughout the lesson. So again, that's why it could be in more than one place. It more than likely will definitely be in your last clip, but it could be in other clips as well. Now, there are 2 rubrics attached to cycle 2, or I'm sorry, to step 2 of cycle 1. This first one, rubric 1.5, as we know, receiving a level 2 meets the standard in order to pass for CalTPA. But of course, we want to get to a level 4. So we'll look at the level 2 language, and then we'll also talk about the level 4 language. So you can see at a level 2, it says that the candidate sets vague learning expectations during the opening of the lesson and minimally connects lesson to prior learning. Okay, so if you do that, it's still a 2, even if it's vague and minimally connected. The candidate's annotations minimally explain the strategies that you attempted to use in order to establish that positive and safe learning environment. And it is not clear that strategies will support students to access and meet content-specific learning goals. So what I'm hearing from a level 2 is everything is very vague and minimal. If you're vague and minimal, you can get a level 2. But of course, we don't want to be vague and minimal. We want to get to a level 4. We're a little bit more explicit. So in order to be at a level 4, you need to meet the expectations of level 3 plus this additional piece. So it says that you set learning expectations during the opening of the lesson that directly connect the lesson to the prior learning. That's where you say, remember yesterday when we were talking about division facts? Well, guess what? Today we're going to continue talking about that, only we're going to dig a little deeper. Right there, you're making the connection to prior learning, okay? Easy to do at the introduction of your lesson. And you explain how this lesson fits into the larger picture. You talk about where you're going and why this is important for their lives. And then it says that your annotations explain how a positive and safe learning environment were established. So if you're just able to explain it and it seems reasonable, that's a level 3. Okay, as to what you did and why you did it in order to create that positive and learning environment. Again, it needs to be evidenced in the clip for you to be able to talk about it. And then the next one is that the strategy seen in the video supports students to access and meet content-specific learning objectives. That means the score is able to see the supports that you're providing in order to help students access the content, and that you're also be able to provide that rationale so that the score has a clear understanding of this is what I did and this is why. Okay? And then to get the level 4, it says that the candidate and students interact with each other through questioning and conversations that demonstrate positive and respectful rapport with each other and reinforce deep learning of content. that's what we want to have happening in our classrooms anyways. You want to have that back and forth flow with your students where you're talking about a topic and they're interjecting, you're asking them the higher order thinking questions, and they're able to have a conversation with you about what they're doing and what it means and how they're going to use this information. The next rubric that we're going to be using for step 2 of cycle 1 is rubric 1.6. And again, level 2 is passing, but we'll also look at the level 4 because that's a great place to aim. At a level 2, it says that your instruction and assessment require students to engage in lower order thinking. We don't typically talk about that in our program. We typically talk about higher order thinking. So you engage students in lower order thinking about content, and or the strategies engage students in passive learning of the content, meaning that you're just lecturing at them, right? And that's the example, is that throughout the lesson, you're just talking and the students are sitting there and listening. There is no active engagement where students are doing think, pair, shares, where students are working with a partner, where they're responding out, where they're coming up and showing their work, where they're using manipulatives, pieces like that. That will show active student engagement. Because just because a student is sitting there and staring and is quiet does not mean they're engaged. That just means they're being passive and they're being complacent. They're not necessarily engaged. So we want to get to that level 4, where students have opportunities to actively develop their own understandings linked to the learning goal. You give them that time to process and think about it and talk about it, and that you monitor students' learning throughout the lessons and adjust instruction for the whole class. So this is where you make individual or group differentiation happen in order to meet the needs of all learners in your classroom for the instruction you're doing, which that's how you're planning the lesson. So it should be evidenced within the video. And you also need these aspects from level 3 as well in order to get a level 4. So it says that the instruction and assessment require students to actively engage in higher order thinking, deep learning. And again, it gives those strong words for you to think about, right? Where they're able to analyze, synthesize, evaluate, interpret, and transfer their learning. And you're having that rich conversation with them. And that you're monitoring students to check for understanding throughout the lesson, right? That you're doing those quick checks throughout, whether it's the thumbs up, it's the whiteboards, it's the Kahoot, whatever it is that you're using to progress monitor throughout the lesson so that by the time you get to the end, you have a true understanding of who is getting it and who needs additional support or who needs to be challenged. For step 2 of cycle 1 for teach and assess, the only thing you are submitting are your 3 annotated video clips. So again, as a reminder, you will share your 3 video clips that you select from your bigger picture, right? So you have to self-select those clips. Your faculty and your cooperative group cannot pick your video clips for you or watch your whole video and tell you which clips you should pick. You have to self-select your 3 video clips that meet those requirements, that you can title what we discussed previously, and you're going to share those with your collaborative group so that they can make sure that what's evidenced in that video actually matches with what the clip title should be. Okay, and the other piece are the 4 annotations that you need to include. And like I said, if you want feedback to make sure that those annotations make sense and connect to what's evidenced in the video, you need to put them into a Word document that you provide to your collaborative group along with your video clips. Because once you have those video clips, again, they're going to the Pearson website, and we'll talk about that at a later date. I don't want to overwhelm anyone at this point, but they will go to the Pearson website where you will use their annotation tool, and faculty cannot see anything that you put up there, so they need to see it ahead of time. And that is the end of our training session for cycle 1, step 2, teach and assess. I hope you have a wonderful day.